Hello everyone. I hope you're all keeping well in these very strange times. My name is Dr. Alexandra Kingston-Rees and I'm a lecturer in modern and contemporary literature here in the Department of English and Related Literature at York. I specialise in 21st century literature, mostly American, and I'm interested in a range of things such as the contemporary essay, form and aesthetics, how visual art and literary texts work together, and the history of reading. What I'm going to do in this mini lecture today is give you a taste of the kind of lecture you might receive with us here at York. In usual circumstances, you would attend lectures in person in a lecture theatre with your cohort. You would see me, you would be surrounded by your peers. But most of our lectures are also recorded and are stored on the virtual learning environment for each module. So this is exactly what you would see listening back to a recorded lecture when revising for a seminar or an essay. So let's begin. Princeton in the summer smelled of nothing. And although Efemelo liked the tranquil greenness of the many trees, the clean streets and stately homes, the delicately overpriced shops and the quiet, abiding air of Erna Grace, it was this, the lack of a smell, that most appealed to her. Perhaps because the other American cities she knew well had all smelled distinctly. Philadelphia had the musty scent of history, New Haven smelled of neglect, Baltimore smelled of brine and Brooklyn of sun-warmed garbage. But Princeton had no smell. She liked taking deep breaths here. She liked watching the locals who drove with pointed courtesy and parked their latest model cars outside the organic grocery store on Nassau Street, or outside the sushi restaurants, or outside the ice cream shop that had 50 different flavors, including red pepper, or outside the post office, where effusive staff bounded out to greet them at the entrance. She liked the campus, grave with knowledge, the Gothic buildings with their vine-laced walls, and the way everything transformed in the half-light of night into a ghostly scene. She liked most of all that in this place of affluent ease, she could pretend to be someone else, someone specially admitted into a hallowed American club, someone adorned with certainty. But she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair. So this is the opening passage of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's prize-winning novel Americana, which was published in 2013. It paints a picture of what it's like to adjust to life as an immigrant. Over the course of the novel, we follow the transnational movements etched by the novel's migratory characters in both the US and the UK. We find an incisive cultural critique of the structures of US racial politics and experience, of the aftermaths of post-colonial identity in Nigeria, of the fetishization of Anglo-American global culture. We also find a definition of Afropoltian feminist experience, which aligns Adichie with other contemporary Afropoltian novelists like Tai Selassie, Yaagyazi, Tejuko, No Violet, Bulawayo, and Ayobami Adebayo. But as much as these threads of difference build and crescendo really through the novel's polyphonic plot lines, they are also apparent in the first few lines. If we look really closely, we can even see this inner attention to style, which is both poetic and rhythmic. Princeton, in the summer, smelled of nothing. In that first phrase, Princeton, in the summer, smelled of nothing, we see Adichie doing something rather tricky. One critic has noted how rather than mimicking the conventional iambic pentameter of traditional English poetry and verse drama, where the stress of speech falls on the second syllable, dee-dum, 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 Adichie has in fact inverted it. So this first phrase has 5 feet, like the pentameter, but is instead made up of trochees, where the stress comes on the second syllable, dum, dee, dum, dee, dum, dee, dum, dee. So, let's scan that line. Princeton in the summer smelled of nothing. Elegant, right? But not just elegant, extremely clever. If English speech and literary heritage tends towards the iambic pentameter, in the meter of the novel's opening line, Adichie is encapsulating the idea of not quite belonging to this tradition. Sure, as a pentameter, it conjures up the English speech rhythms and the wealth of Anglo-American literary heritage, but by replacing iambs with trochees, the line signals its difference. This line and its speaker don't belong. To have evoked it already in just 10 syllables is an exceptional example of how novelistic style might be telling us something different than the meaning of the prose itself. In just a few lines, the novel has not only glided over the long, politically contested history of colonial subjects writing in English, but has cemented the feeling of unbelonging that creates the distance from this world that the character Efemelo needs in order to perform the social critique in her blog Race, Tenth or Curious Observations by a Non-American Black on the subject of blackness in America. A blog so successful in the novel it earns her fellowships and well-paid speaking engagements. It's this feeling of unbelonging too that spurs on the endgame of the novel, foreshadowing the eventuality of Efemelo's move back to Nigeria. Although she liked this world, she liked the tranquil greenness of the many trees. She liked taking deep breaths here. She liked watching the locals. She liked the campus, and she liked most of all that in this place of affluent ease, she could pretend to be someone else, someone especially admitted into a hallowed American club, someone adorned with certainty. The easy liquidity of this first paragraph, though, is brought to an abrupt end with the but of the following sentence. But she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair. A sentence of monosyllabic words, this is a but that introduces racial difference. Unlike many of Princeton's residents, she is black and she braids her hair. The next line goes, it was unreasonable to expect a braiding salon in Princeton. The few black locals she had seen were so light-skinned and lank-haired she could not imagine them wearing braids. And yet as she waited at Princeton Junction station for the train on an afternoon ablaze with heat, she wondered why there was no place where she could braid her hair. It is a but that suggests that to be black and to be a black woman is to be an outsider geographically, where things like hair salons are on the outskirts of town. We know from the very first page, with its overt affection for watching the locals drive around politely, the implication that in order to pretend to be someone else, you can't be known in that place, and that she has to travel to have her hair done, that Efemelo is an outsider here. Its detailed descriptions of the abrasive Aisha, the Senegalese woman who braids her hair, as she pulls it too tight into a medium kinky twist, of Efemelo as she combs her hair herself, dense, soft and tightly coiled, until it framed her head like a halo, slipping into the coaxing tone of the proselytizer that she used whenever she was trying to convince other black women about the merits of wearing their hair natural, of Aisha snorting as she clearly could not understand why anyone would choose to suffer through combing natural hair instead of simply relaxing it. Later in Americana, Efemelo writes in a blog post that hair is the perfect metaphor for race in America. But the novel shows that it is also the perfect metaphor for intersectional feminism. Let's look at an example. White girlfriend and I are Michelle Obama's groupies. So the other day I say to her, I wonder if Michelle Obama has a weave. Her hair looks fuller today, and all that heat every day must damage it. And she says, do you mean her hair doesn't grow like that? When you do have natural Negro hair, people think you did something to your hair. Actually, the folks with the afros and the dreads are the ones who haven't done anything to their hair. You should be asking Beyonce what she's done. Imagine if Michelle Obama got tired of all the heat and decided to go natural and appeared on TV with lots of woolly hair or tight spirally curls. There's no knowing what her texture will be. It's not unusual for a black woman to have 3 textures on her head. She would she would totally rock, but poor Obama would certainly lose the independent vote, even the undecided Democrat vote. Part of Adichie's meteoric rise in popularity in the last 10 years is due to the celebrity cluster around her TED Talk, We Should All Be Feminists, from 2012, in which she spoke of being a feminist in Nigeria. Every year since the end of 2015, every 16-year-old in Sweden has received a copy of the book that was adapted from the TEDx talk. A section of We Should All Be Feminists was sampled in Beyonce's 2013 song Flawless, and the 2017 Dior campaign, led by the fashion house's first female artistic director, Maria Chiori, has featured on its title on an absurdly expensive t-shirt. You can, you used to be able to purchase that for £490, but obviously there are knockoffs as well. So the line from the novel, "But she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair," not only signals that racial difference lies on a periphery, but works to bring it to the center. Adichie's particular brand of Afrofeminism suggests an overlapping of race and traditional white structures of feminism and prioritizes the perspectives of African women, suggesting there is space and a necessity for feminism and African culture. And when voiced through a novel such as Americana, written from a perspective of triple marginalization, from the positions of black, female, and immigrant, help us understand the predicament of intersectional subjects. So is the affluent ease, this adornment of certainty that the novel begins with, simply a pretense? The novel suggests, yes, there was cement in her soul, we are told 3 pages later. It had been there for a while, an early morning disease of fatigue, a bleakness, a borderlessness. It brought with it amorphous longings, shapeless desires, brief imaginary glints of other lives she could be living, that over the months melded into a piercing homesickness. While for Efemelo, borderlessness offers up the clean slate that allows her to become Americana, to pretend to be someone else, ultimately brings about a bleak fatigue. For other contemporary global novelists, borderlessness is not simply a personal affliction, but political. In 2005, Tai Selassie, the author of the novel Ghana Must Go, defined the term Afropoltian to describe this kind of global mobility, transnational being, and recombinatory aesthetic of Africans of the world, spurred on by the end of colonial administration and military dictatorship in many African nations, which brought new opportunities for young Africans to ride the increasingly unhindered flow of capital, commodities, information, ideas, and people across an ever more globalized world. She wrote, "They, read we, are Afropolitans, the newest generation of African immigrants, coming soon or collected already at a law firm, Kim Lab Jazz Lounge near you. You'll know us by our funny blend of London fashion, New York jargon, African ethics, and academic successes. Some of us are ethnic mixes, e.g. Ghanaian and Canadian, Nigerian and Swiss. Others merely cultural mutts, American accent, European affect, African ethos. Most of us are multilingual. In addition to English and a romantic or two, we understand some indigenous tongue and speak a few urban vernaculars. There is at least one place on the African continent to which we tie our sense of self, be it a nation-state such as Ethiopia, a city, Ibadan, or an auntie's kitchen. Then there's the G8 city or 2 or 3 that we know like the backs of our hands, and the various institutions that know us by our famed focus. We are Afropolitans, not citizens, but Africans of the world. So Selassie identifies herself as Afropolitan as a way of identifying her antechamber of identitylessness, as a way of accounting for her possible identities of Ghanaian, because her father is Ghanaian, of Nigerian, because her mother is Nigerian and Scottish, of American, because she spent a lot of time there, and British, because she was born here. She argues that we ought to move away from the language of nationality to one of locality instead. For Selassie, to be Afropolitan is to be at home in Africa and in the world. Home is plural. Home for this lot, she says, is many things. Where their parents are from, where they go for vacation, where they went to school, where they see old friends, where they live or live this year. Like so many African young people working and living in cities around the globe, they belong to no single geography, but feel at home in many. So Americana questions this utopian idea. Can the malaise of a soul be weighed down by cement, by an early morning disease of fatigue, a bleakness, a borderlessness, be solved only by returning home? And where is home anyway? I'm not going to go into what it's like when Ifemelo does return to Nigeria, so no spoilers here. You should go and read the novel if you haven't already. But we can tell from the very first page that returning won't be that simple. So the very first lines of the novel are proleptic, allowing us to kind of zoom forward in terms of its tone and style. So this, of course, is not to say that contemporary writers don't identify with place. They do. So recall the affection that Ifemelo, that Adichie evokes of Princeton's scentless summer air. But when enough writers stand up and say, don't pigeonhole us based on our nationality, we as critics and students of literature should listen. Why not grapple with where a writer is local, with, as Nigerian American novelist Tiju Cole notes, their European antecedents, Indian influences, Icelandic fantasies, Brazilian aspiration. The form of the novel, Selassie says, has the ability to contain the ambiguity that we seek to control in our efforts to label. So the reason why this is really important, writers like Tiju Cole and Tai Selassie and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie questioning this idea of home, of nationality, and urging us towards locality, is that when we approach literary study, traditionally we've approached it by nationality. We read literature according to national traditions. You know, and these traditions tell us things about aesthetics, tell us things about forms, tell us things about, you know, politics and ethics, about the societies in which these works have been composed and which they reflect and speak to. But contemporary writers move across the globe. They live across the globe. It's the very nature of contemporary publishing that writers are dispersed across places. So critics and students of literature need to adjust our traditional ways of thinking about literary works and come up with new ways of thinking about it. Listening to contemporary writers is one of those things we must do. So for Adichie, ambiguity is lost when we only tell one story about ourselves, or when there is only one story that is told about us. In another TED Talk Adichie gave in 2009, The Danger of a Single Story, she argued that we need to work very hard to reject the single story of any culture or place. When we realize that there is never a single story about any place, she notes, we regain a kind of paradise. She argues that the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. There is a word, an Igbo word, she goes on, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is Nkali. It is a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of Nkali. How they were told, who tells them, when they're told, how the stories are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. So to come back to that pivot, but she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair. We see Nkali at work. The power imbalance of what is at the center and what is at the periphery. To come back to that elegant first line, Princeton in the summer smelled of nothing. We see Nkali dispersed as a post-colonial novelist uses the patterns of an imperial language to invert them, disrupt them, to take ownership of them. English is mine, Adichie says. I was educated in it. I spoke it the same time I spoke Igbo. My English speaking is rooted in a Nigerian experience and not in a British or American or Australian one. I have taken ownership of English. And this ownership, of course, must also be reflected in what stories are told, not just in what language they are told. I do not believe in being prescriptive about art, she says. I think African writers should write in whatever language they can. The important thing is to tell African stories. So I'm going to leave the lecture on that note, on that provocation. So this is the kind of teaching that you would get in our first year module, A World of Literature 2, Empire and Aftermaths. So in fact, I teach Americana in the final 2 weeks of that module, where we consider linguistic imperialism and consider the debates about writing in English, including the theorist Frantz Fanon and the poet and essayist Cathy Park Hong, who's just released a brilliant collection of essays called Minor Feelings. And I really recommend you read it because it's absolutely brilliant. So usually when I teach this material, I have 2 paired lectures. And we go through a range of other examples like Caribbean poetry, translation, critical race theory, and theory on intersectional feminism. I also teach on modules on American literature. I convene the second year American literature module, as well as specialist modules on affect and emotion and contemporary writing. So I hope that you enjoyed the lecture. If you have any questions at all, whether it's admissions related or whether it's related to the lecture that I've just given, feel free to contact us. So if it's about the lecture, please feel free to just email me, alexandra.kingston-reese@york.ac.uk. And if you have questions about the admissions process, please feel free to email us on english-ug-admissions@york.ac.uk. Check us out on Twitter, UOY English. We've also got a brilliant book club, the Quiet Place Book Club, which has just gone virtual. So you may have already heard about this and the other materials that we've released for this day, but we have a virtual book club, and it's open to everybody. So if you'd like to get started with us, come and join us on Instagram. Okay. But I do hope you'll join us to discover a world of literature at York come September, and I hope that in the meantime you stay well and healthy and enjoy the reading that you're going to do as well.